great hall of the kingdom was filled with music, torches, and the low hum of voices. The queen sat on her throne, her crown shining under the light. Her name was Isabella, and many in the court said she was the most beautiful woman they had ever seen. Yet her beauty was not the only thing that made people look at her with awe. She had power, pride, and the respect of her people. On this night, she rose from her throne, and the sound of the hall grew silent. She carried in her hands a small box made of strange silver metal. No one knew where it came from, but it was said to be older than the kingdom itself. The box had no keyhole, no hinges, no crack to force it open. Many strong men had tried to break it, but none had even left a scratch. The box became a symbol, and Isabella guarded it with care. The queen lifted the box high, and her voice rang out through the hall. She said, "This box has been sealed for generations. Whoever can unlock it shall not only claim its secret, but also my hand in marriage." Gasps filled the room. Men from noble houses sat up straighter, their eyes hungry for the chance. Some whispered to each other, already plotting how they could be the one to open it. Others laughed, believing it was only a game for many before had failed. A knight in polished armor stepped forward. His name was Edward, a man known for his strength. He bowed and asked to try, but when he pressed his hands against the box, nothing happened. He pulled and twisted with all his might until sweat ran down his face, yet the box stayed closed. The queen told him to step back. Another man tried, and then another. Some struck the box against the stone floor, some prayed over it, some whispered charms they thought would work. Nothing happened. The hall grew restless, and whispers spread that perhaps the queen's promise was only words. For no man alive could open the cursed box. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a voice spoke. "I will try." The hall turned. A young soldier stood there. His name was Daniel. He wore no fine robes, no golden chain, no polished armor. His uniform was plain, his boots worn from years of service. He was no noble, only a common man who fought at the borders of the kingdom. The crowd burst into laughter, and even some guards sneered at his boldness. But Queen Isabella lifted her hand, and the laughter stopped. Her eyes studied the young man. He was steady, not shaken by the mocking voices. His gaze did not lower before the nobles. She saw something in him that was not in the others. "You may try," she said. Daniel walked through the hall until he stood before her throne. The nobles watched with sharp eyes, some with anger, some with disbelief. He reached out and placed his hands on the box. The surface felt warm to him, though others had said it was cold as stone. He pressed his fingers along the lines, searching not for a keyhole, not for a weakness, but for something hidden. Nothing happened. The box stayed sealed, but Daniel did not pull or force it. He only stood in silence, his brow furrowed as though he was listening. Finally, he looked up at Isabella and spoke. His voice was calm. "It does not wish to be opened by those who seek power. I will not break it. But I will try again if you allow me." The court stirred at his words, whispering in confusion. Who was this soldier to speak of wishes and secrets? Many mocked him again, but Isabella silenced them with a single glance. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Daniel. "Why do you dare to try, when you have nothing to gain and much to lose?" Daniel stood tall, his hand still resting on the box. "Because I have nothing to lose and everything to protect." The queen's heart gave a sudden beat. The word struck her, though she did not show it. She nodded slowly and ordered that Daniel would be allowed another attempt. The nobles muttered with anger. Some felt insulted that a soldier had been given a chance, while they had failed. But the people who served in the hall, the guards and the handmaidens, looked at Daniel with new eyes. The challenge had begun, and though the box remained closed, a spark had been lit. That night, the palace was restless. The queen's challenge had spread beyond the walls like fire. In every street, men argued over who could be the one to unlock the box. The nobles whispered in their chambers, plotting how they could stop the soldier from ever standing near the throne again. Daniel, however, did not sleep in gold or silk. He stayed in the quarters given to the guards, a small stone room with only a bed and a table. He sat awake, staring at the box in his mind, thinking of the strange warmth he had felt when he touched it. No one else had spoken of warmth. To them, the box had always been cold. He wondered if the queen had noticed. He remembered her eyes, calm yet sharp, when she had asked him why he dared. He had told her the truth, but he was not sure if she believed it. As the moon rose higher, there came a knock at his door. Daniel opened it to find 2 guards. They bowed slightly and said the queen had summoned him in secret, followed them through quiet halls lit by torches, until they reached a private chamber. Queen Isabella was waiting alone, her crown set aside, her hair falling across her shoulders. The room was silent, except for the fire burning in the hearth. Shh. She looked at him closely and said, "You are not like the others. You see only power, wealth, or pride." You spoke as though the box was alive. Why? Daniel stood tall, though he was only a soldier before a queen. Because I felt it. When I touched it, it was not cold. It was warm, like it was listening. I do not know why, but I believe it will only open when the right heart is near. The queen studied him, her face unreadable. Then she asked, "Do you believe you are that heart?" Daniel did not boast. He did not bow low and beg. He only said, "I do not know. But I will try until I cannot stand." For the first time that night, Isabella smiled, though only for a brief moment. Then she grew stern again. "The nobles will not accept this easily. Many already hate you for daring to stand where they failed. They may strike against you." "I am not afraid," Daniel replied. "You should be," she said, turning her eyes to the fire. "But they will not fight you openly. They will plot, they will whisper, and they will strike from the shadows. You may not even see the blade until it finds you." Daniel clenched his fists, but his voice stayed steady. "Then let them come. If I fall, I fall. But I will not step back." The queen turned to him again. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, yet in it there was something unspoken. Finally, she dismissed him, and the guards led him back to his room. The next morning, the palace was alive with noise. The nobles pressed against the throne, demanding that Isabella cancel the soldiers' chants. They said it was an insult to the throne, that a common man should not be raised to such honor. Isabella silenced them with a single command. "The challenge stands. Whoever opens the box shall have my promise, even a soldier." Her words shook the hall. Some bowed with anger burning in their eyes. Others whispered to each other in fear of what it might mean. When Daniel was called again to stand before the throne, many laughed openly. One knight shouted that a soldier had no right to touch the box again. Daniel ignored their voices. He stepped forward, his eyes steady on the queen, and placed his hands on the box once more. Again, he felt the warmth. Again, the box refused to open. But he did not pull or strike it. He closed his eyes and stayed silent, as though listening to something no one else could hear. The nobles grew restless, mocking him. But the queen raised her hand and kept the hall quiet. Her eyes never left Daniel. Time passed, and at last he stepped back, his hands falling from the box. "Not today," he said simply. "But I will not stop." The hall burst into noise, some in laughter, some in anger. Yet, the queen's eyes softened for a heartbeat before she turned away. That night, in hidden corners of the palace, men spoke of daggers and poison. Daniel had begun to stir not only hope but also hatred. The palace grew heavy with whispers in the days that followed. Nobles walked in shadows, their voices low, their eyes sharp whenever the soldier passed. They could not accept that a common man might rise higher than them. The queen's word had bound the challenge, and they could not break it in open sight. But they could move behind curtains where no eyes watched. Daniel felt the weight of those stairs. Every step he took across the marble floors echoed louder than it should have. Servants hurried past with lowered eyes. Guards stood straighter when he neared. Yet he knew that danger pressed closer with each passing hour. He spent his nights alone, his thoughts on the box. He remembered the warmth beneath his hands, the faint hum like a heartbeat. He wondered what lay within. Was it a treasure, a weapon, or something else? Whatever it was, he knew it was not meant for greedy hands. The queen's ancestors had made it for a reason, and that reason called to him. One evening, he walked in the palace gardens, the moonlight falling across the stone paths. A handmaiden approached, carrying a basket of flowers for the queen. Her name was Clara, and she often crossed paths with Daniel. She stopped to thank him again for saving her weeks before, when a falling beam nearly struck her in the courtyard. Their words were brief, but behind the hedge's eyes were watching. 3 men stepped out, cloaked and armed with daggers.
Older.
They were no thieves. They moved with the quiet skill of killers. Daniel pushed Clara aside as the first man lunged. Steel flashed in the moonlight. He twisted and caught the man's wrist, forcing the blade away, but the second came from behind. Pain tore across his shoulder as the knife cut deep. Daniel gritted his teeth and turned, striking the man hard enough to send him stumbling. The third rushed forward. Daniel ducked, driving his elbow into the man's chest, but another strike came fast, slicing across his arm. Blood ran down, warm against the cold night air. Clara screamed, calling for guards, but Daniel did not stop. He grabbed a fallen dagger and faced the three men. They circled him, silent and focused. His breath was heavy, his strength fading, yet his will held firm. The first man attacked again. Daniel blocked with the dagger and drove his fist into the man's jaw. The second came fast, and Daniel swung low, cutting across his leg. The third hesitated, seeing the soldier still standing. Before they could strike again, the sound of armored boots filled the garden. Guards rushed in, blades drawn. The assassins turned and fled into the night, vanishing beyond the hedges. Daniel staggered, his arm hanging weak, blood dripping from his sleeve. Clara caught him before he could fall, her hands shaking. The guards surrounded them, shocked by what they had seen. One ran at once to summon the queen. Moments later, Isabella came, her gown trailing behind her. Her eyes widened when she saw Daniel wounded. She dropped to his side without care for her crown or station. She pressed her hand against his arm to stop the blood. "You are hurt," she said, her voice low but firm. Daniel looked at her with steady eyes. "I am alive. That is enough." She shook her head, anger flashing across her face. "This is their doing. They will not stop. You have made them fear you." Daniel forced himself to sit upright. "Let them fear me. Will not run." Her gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, her mask of royalty slipped. There was something in her eyes not only of a queen, but of a woman who felt more than duty. She gave a command to the guards to carry him to the healers, and ordered that Clara be kept safe as well. That night, the palace was shaken. The attack spread whispers through every corridor. Some nobles pretended shock, but behind their false words they hid their satisfaction that the soldier had bled. Others feared what might come next, for if he survived and still pressed on, then perhaps the box truly waited for him. Daniel lay in the healer's chamber, his wounds bound, his mind unbroken. His body ached, but his resolve had grown stronger. He had faced blades in the dark, and still stood. If the box had tested his heart, he would not fail it. And in the queen's chamber, Isabella stood alone at her window, looking out into the night. For the first time she wondered if her promise had already begun to bind her in ways no crown or vow could undo. Daniel's wounds healed slowly, but his spirit did not bend. He returned to the training yard within days, his arms still wrapped in cloth, his step steady. Guards watched him with respect now, for word of the attack had spread, and he whispered that he had faced death, and still chosen to rise again. The queen often came to see him from a distance, though she did not speak much. Her council pressed her to end the challenge, to protect her throne from danger, but Isabella refused. She said the trial had been declared before the court, and it would not be broken. Behind her calm face, she carried worry, for she knew the nobles would not stop their plotting. One evening, Daniel was called again to stand before the box. The hall was full, nobles seated in rows, their eyes sharp with jealousy. The people of the city had crowded the steps outside the palace, waiting to hear what would happen. Daniel stood tall before the throne. His wounds were not yet fully closed, but he did not show weakness. He placed his hands on the box once more. The warmth spread through his palms, stronger than before. He closed his eyes and stayed silent. The hall grew restless as the seconds passed, but he did not move. He thought not of power or glory. He thought of his childhood in the small fields, of his mother's tired hands, of the days when hunger was stronger than rest. He thought of the friends he had lost in war, of the blood he had shed for a land that never remembered his name. He thought of his vow to protect, even when no one saw it. The box stayed sealed, but something inside it pulsed faintly, like a heart beating in answer. Daniel opened his eyes, knowing the moment had not yet come, and stepped back. The nobles burst into anger. One shouted that the soldier wasted the queen's time. Another declared that the box had been sealed for ages, and no man would ever open it. They demanded the queen end the trial and cast Daniel out, but Isabella rose from her throne. Her voice carried across the hall, sharp as steel. The trial remains. The box will open when the right soul touches it. Until then, no one shall bar him from trying. The nobles fell silent, their pride wounded. Some bowed, some clenched their fists in rage. The people outside cheered when the words reached them. That night, Daniel walked through the palace garden once more. Guards followed him now, for the queen had ordered his protection. Yet even among them he felt the weight of hidden eyes. The attack had not broken him, but he knew it would not be the last. Later, Isabella came to him in the healer's hall. She wore no crown, only a plain cloak to hide her rank. She sat beside him and looked at his bandaged arm. "You risked your life when you could have walked away," she said. Daniel met her gaze. "If I walk away, then the box will never open. And if it is meant to open, I cannot leave it behind." Her voice softened, though her eyes were steady. "Do you seek the crown, Daniel, or do you seek something else?" He shook his head. "I do not seek the crown. I seek the truth inside the box. If that truth belongs to me, I will take it. If not, then I will fall trying." Isabella turned her eyes away, the firelight catching in them. For a long moment, silence lay between them. The court grows divided. Half demand I remove you. Half fear what will happen if you succeed. You must be ready, for the storm will come soon. Daniel rose, though his body ached. "Let it come. I am ready." The queen looked at him once more before leaving. She did not answer, but something unspoken passed between them. When she was gone, Daniel sat in the quiet chamber, his hand resting over the bandage. He felt the warmth again, not from his wound, but from the memory of the box. It was waiting, was listening. And though the kingdom pressed against him, though blades hunted him in the dark, Daniel knew he would not stop. The kingdom grew restless as the days passed. People spoke of nothing else but the soldier and the box. In the markets, in the inns, even in the fields, men and women argued. Some said the queen's promise was a trick, for the box could never be opened. Others said the soldier would succeed, for he was not like the nobles who had failed. Inside the palace, the tension grew sharper. Nobles gathered in secret chambers, whispering their fears. If Daniel opened the box, the queen would be bound by her word, and the bloodlines of the court would be broken by the hand of a common man. To them it was a disgrace that could not be allowed. They plotted again, but with more care, for the queen had tightened her guard around him. Daniel spent his hours alone with the box, under the eyes of the court. He never forced it, never shouted at it or cursed it. He simply placed his hands on the surface and listened. Some nobles mocked him, calling him mad, but the people who watched from the edges grew quiet when he did it. There was something in his calm, something that carried weight. He began to speak as he touched the box. His voice was low, but the hall carried his words. He did not speak of riches or crowns. He spoke of his life, of the cold nights when hunger had followed him, of the battles where he had stood when others fell. He spoke of the promise he made to himself long ago, that he would never turn his back on those who needed him. At first the nobles scoffed, but slowly the hall changed. Servants who passed near stopped to listen. Guards lowered their eyes, their faces solemn. Even Isabella, seated high on her throne, felt her chest grow tight at his words. She tried to hide it, but she could not stop her heart from stirring. When Daniel finished, the box gave a faint sound, like a soft pulse. A shimmer ran across the silver, so quick that many missed it, but the queen saw it. Her hand tightened on the arm of her throne. The box had answered him, if only for a breath. The nobles noticed as well, and fear struck them. They left the hall that day with anger heavy on their faces. That night they gathered again, more desperate than before. Some called for poison, others for another knife in the dark. One warned that if they struck openly and failed, the people would rise against them. For the city already spoke of the soldier as if he were chosen. Yet in the end, they agreed on one thing. Daniel must not live to touch the box again. While they plotted, the queen stood alone on her balcony, looking over the city. She thought of Daniel's words, of the way he had spoken not as a man seeking power, but as one who had carried burden all his life. She had seen many men kneel for her crown, but none had stood as he did, unbent by pride. She whispered to herself, though no one heard, Perhaps the box is already chosen. The next morning, Daniel was called again. The hall was full, the air heavy with tension. The people outside pressed against the gates, waiting to hear the news. The nobles sat stiff and cold, their eyes burning with hate. Daniel placed his hands on the box. The warmth flowed stronger now, as if it recognized him. He spoke again, his voice steady, carrying across the hall. He spoke not of himself this time, but of the kingdom. He spoke of farmers who broke their backs for bread, soldiers who bled on forgotten fields, of mothers who buried their children after wars that gained nothing. He spoke of their pain, and of his vow to stand for them even when no crown commanded it. The box shimmered once more. This time, more saw it, and the whispers filled the court. The nobles shifted uneasily, their fear turning into rage. But the queen's eyes never left Daniel. She saw the truth the box was slowly revealing. He stepped back when nothing more happened, his breath heavy, but his spirit unbroken. The hall broke into noise again, half mocking, half afraid. Isabella raised her hand and ended it with silence. "The trial continues," she declared. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for challenge. Daniel looked at her. Their eyes met across the hall, and though no words passed between them, something stronger than speech bound them in that moment. Outside the palace, the people shouted his name. Inside the shadows, the nobles sharpened their daggers. The day of decision came sooner than many expected. The palace was filled with tension, and the city beyond the gates was alive with noise. People had left their work, leaving markets and fields behind to gather in the streets. They waited for news, their eyes on the high towers of the palace, where the trial would take place. Inside the throne hall, the nobles gathered, their faces hard with pride and fear. Some muttered among themselves, speaking of the shame if the soldier succeeded. Others sat silent, watching with sharp eyes, waiting for a chance to strike. Guards lined the walls, their armor bright under the torches, but even among them Daniel felt the weight of danger. The queen sat upon her throne, her crown gleaming in the light. Her face was calm, yet her heart beat strong beneath her robe. She looked at Daniel as he entered, his steps steady, his eyes clear. He wore no armor of gold or steel, only the plain uniform of a soldier, yet he stood taller than any noble. The box rested before the throne, its surface shining like silver, though no fire touched it. It had remained sealed through the hands of kings and knights, yet today it seemed to breathe with quiet life. Daniel stepped forward. The nobles muttered, some scoffing, others shaking their heads. The queen raised her hand, and silence fell. He placed his hands upon the box. At once the warmth surged through him, stronger than ever before. It felt alive, as if something inside stirred at his touch. He closed his eyes and drew a breath. This time he spoke not only to the box, but to all who listened. His voice carried across the hall, through the gates, and out to the crowds beyond. He spoke of loyalty, of sacrifice, of standing when the world had nothing to offer. He spoke of the lives of common people, of the struggles they bore while nobles quarreled for power. He spoke of love for the land and for those who had no voice in the great halls. The hall grew still. Even those who hated him fell quiet, for his words struck where swords could not. The queen leaned forward on her throne, her eyes locked on him. The box began to glow faintly, light spreading across its surface. The nobles stirred uneasily. Some stood, shouting that it was trickery, but the glow grew brighter. The locks that had never been seen began to shift, moving as if unseen hands worked within. Gasps filled the hall. The people outside pressed closer to the gates as the news spread. The impossible was happening. But before the final lock could fall, a cry rang out. One of the nobles had drawn his sword, rushing forward with fury. He shouted that a common man would not take the queen, that the crown must never be stained with low blood. Aiming for Daniel's heart. The guards rushed to stop him, but Daniel did not flinch. He turned, his eyes sharp, and caught the noble's arm with his own bleeding hand. The sword cut across his side, pain burning through him, but he did not fall. He struck with his fist, sending the noble crashing to the floor. The box trembled under his other hand, glowing brighter as if it had seen his resolve. The queen rose from her throne, her voice ringing like steel. "Enough, the trial is sacred. No man shall break it." The guards dragged the noble away, but the hall remained shaken. Daniel stood bleeding, his hand still pressed to the box. He closed his eyes once more, whispering words no one else could hear. The final lock clicked. The box gave a great sound, like a breath released after endless years. The glow spread until the whole hall was bathed in silver light. Slowly the lid rose, revealing what had been hidden within. Gasps filled the hall as the light faded. Inside lay no gold, no jewels, no weapon of war. Resting within was a crown, plain yet strong, made of woven silver and steel. It shone with a quiet power, not of riches, but of truth. Daniel stepped back, his chest rising with heavy breaths. The box stood open at last. The hall erupted in cries. Some shouted in joy, others in anger, but none could deny what had happened. The box had been opened by the hands of a soldier. The queen stood tall, her voice cutting through the noise. The trial is complete. The promise will be kept. The nobles froze, their pride broken. The people outside roared with cheers when the news reached them. Daniel, wounded but unbroken, had done what no one else could. He had unlocked the box. The hall was filled with noise. People outside shouted in joy, their voices shaking the walls. Inside, the nobles stood frozen, their pride crushed under the weight of truth. They could not deny what had been seen. Daniel, a soldier with no title and no land, had opened the box that no noble had ever touched. The queen stepped down from her throne. Her long robes swept across the stone floor as she walked toward the soldier. The light from the crown in the box reflected upon her face, making her look both fierce and calm. She stopped in front of him, her eyes steady. Daniel was bleeding, his side torn by the blade, but he stood straight. His hands still bore the marks of the box, lines glowing faintly as though the crown itself had chosen him. He looked at the queen, his face showing no fear. The nobles began to shout again. Some cried that the crown must belong to the bloodline of kings. Others demanded that the box be sealed again. They feared the rise of a man who had no ties to their families, for it meant the end of their power. The queen raised her hand and the noise fell. Her voice was firm. The promise of the box has been fulfilled. The one who opened it has earned his place. The law of the land is greater than the pride of men. The words struck like thunder. The guards lowered their heads. The people outside cheered louder, and even the nobles could not answer. The trial had been sacred for generations. To defy it would be to defy the crown itself. She turned to Daniel. You have opened the box. Will you claim the crown and the vow that comes with it? The hall grew silent. Every eye was on him. Daniel looked at the crown, shining with silver light. Wow. He thought of the promise, the vow that if a man could open the box, the queen would stand beside him. He thought of the weight it carried, the kingdom that looked for hope, the people who now called his name. But he also thought of the blood on his hands, of the war he had seen, of the quiet life he once dreamed of. His heart was heavy with the choice. At last he stepped forward. His hand reached into the box and lifted the crown. The light spread across the hall, filling every corner with a glow that silenced even the loudest mouths. He turned and placed the crown upon the head of the queen. The hall gasped. Daniel spoke, his voice clear. The crown belongs to the queen. My vow is not to rule, but to protect. I opened the box not for power, but for honor. My place is by her side, not above her throne. The queen's eyes widened. For a moment she could not speak. The nobles were struck dumb. Even the people outside waited in silence for what she would say. At last her voice broke through, softer than before. But carrying the strength of steel? Then so it shall be. You will stand at my side, not as a servant, but as the one chosen by the trial. Together we will rule, not as queen and soldier, but as one. The hall shook with the roar of the people outside. The cheers grew louder than ever, rising through the streets, carried on every wind. The kingdom had found its answer, and no blade or pride could silence it. The nobles bowed, some with anger, others with acceptance, but all with defeat. The trial had spoken, and their power was broken. Daniel stood at the queen's side as the crown gleamed above her head. The weight of the years lifted from the hall, and a new beginning shone before them. That night, the city was alive with fire and song. From the poorest street to the richest hall, the people celebrated. The promise had been kept, the trial had been won, and the queen stood not alone, but but with the man who had proven his heart. Daniel sat beside her in the high hall, his wounds bound, his strength still firm. She looked at him and smiled, not as a ruler, but as a woman who had found trust where she least expected it. The crown rested on her head, but the light of the box remained in his hand, faint and eternal, as if to mark him forever. The kingdom had changed, and the story of the soldier and the queen would be told for generations. Not as a tale of war, but as a tale of honor and love. And so the box was closed again, not locked by steel, but sealed by the truth of what had been proven. The soldier had won not power, but something greater. He had won a place in the heart of the queen and the trust of a kingdom.